Before we start our panel, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the upcoming Consul General, Canadian Consul General for Brazil, for Rio de Janeiro, Evelyn Colon. She's here with us today. Thank you, Evelyn, for your presence. We're gonna talk today about M&A. This is the second time that the BCCC invited me to moderate the M&A panel. M&A is a big part of my practice, and I have a special care of M&A in Brazil, and I hope that we can have a good discussion today. If you look at the M&A scenario, 2015, it was one of the best years for M&A around the world. 2015, we have around $4.9 billion in M&A, beating the 2017, $3 billion, beating the 2017 record. That was mainly led by Kraft Heinz, InBev, and Miller. It's interesting that despite the crisis, despite everything that is happening in Brazil, we are seeing a growth in M&A. And a new report of the Ernst Young shows that 75% of the executives that was interviewed, they are very positive and they are very bullish about M&A next year. So we will expect an increase in the number of M&A in 2017. 2016 was a difficult year, especially like we saw what happened in Europe with the exit of the UK. We also have the US election and the Trump coming and all the uncertainties that was bringing. And we are also seeing like around the world like a more sentiment against globalization, which impact M&A activities as well, because most of those M&As, they face 2 or 3 or 4 or more jurisdictions, and you have to deal with competition authority on those jurisdictions. And we also been seeing a tightening up of the competition law around the world. So that being said, like this year it still was a very good year for M&A in Latin America, and we're seeing a lot of Canadian companies taking advantage of the opportunities they are presenting, not only in Brazil, but Latin America in general. If you look for Brazil itself, we saw recently Brookfield did 2 major acquisitions in Brazil this year. One was the Odebrecht Ambiental for $768 million, and another one more recently, like close a couple of days ago, was the utility of Petrobras for $5.2 billion. We also had at the beginning of the year the China Moly acquiring the Anglo potash niobium assets in Brazil for $1.5 billion. So that shows that the fundamentals, the macro fundamentals are there. Brazil has potential for growth. And it's just a matter of going through this crisis that we are facing right now in Brazil, and those opportunities will come. So companies that have appetite, companies that understand the country, companies that knows that Brazil, what we have right now in Brazil, it's a momentum. It's not something that will last forever. So it's a short-term problem, and on the medium long term, Brazil will grow, and we will see those companies benefit from the investment that they're doing in this scenario. Other countries like Peru, Mexico, and Colombia also received the investment from major Canadian companies. Without any further ado, I'd like to now introduce our panel and start our discussion. So I would like to invite to sit here with me Louis-Pierre Emond, Consul and Senior Trade Commission for Brazil at the Canadian Consulate General in São Paulo. And I would also like to invite Daniella Tavares, partner at Lobo, DeRizzo, Advogados, and Paulo Dalla Nora, partner at Free Capital. They both will be speaking by video conference. Daniella asked me to apologize to you as she was coming to Toronto, but unfortunately something else happened and she couldn't be here with us today. So without any further ado, I will start our discussions with Paulo Dalla Nora, and then I'll ask Louis-Pierre to talk a little bit, and then we close with Daniella Tavares. Thank you very much. Paulo, over to you.
Right, thank you very much for having me. First of all, thank you, Carolina, for the Brazilian-Canadian Chamber of Commerce for inviting me. Just to clarify, I am in London, not in Brazil, so I didn't put up that pullover to I'm in Toronto. I'm in London. And just going, direct to the presentation. My idea here is give you like a broader view what FI believes in, what we are doing. Concerning what we think is going to be a good investment in Brazil in the next 10 years or so. We really believe that, the next 10 years in Brazil is going to be about infrastructure. That's why I'm putting this first slide, which is we have to remind ourselves, maybe Brazilians don't read that much. We are, if you take infrastructure, we are a destination that no serious infrastructure investor in the world, they have the obligation to look into Brazil. If you see that slide, if you take out United States, Brazil is has the second biggest infrastructure gap from 2015 until 2013. That is in absolute figures. Brazil is going to need $14 billion in infrastructure. That's bigger than Germany, Mexico, Indonesia, and not only the only bigger one is US. And then you have, of course, the question that, of course, the yields in the US will be different from the yields in infrastructure in Brazil. So Brazil is a must-go destination for infrastructure. And why now? Because someone can turn for the second slide. Well, why infrastructure? Consumer in Brazil will take at least 10 years to recover. To go back to 2010. So if you want to invest in Brazil, the really big thing that's out there right now for the next 10 years is infrastructure. If you invest in consumer company, that's going to take, in our view, at least 10 years to go back to the same place. So infrastructure is really the place to be in terms of investment in Brazil. And why, in terms of what's the difference now compared to the past? Why infrastructure is so much attractive right now? First of all, because for the first time in history, that's the first major point. If I would have one slide with one point, that's gonna be the point. That's the first time that we're gonna have concession privatization in Brazil taking place without the effect of the big construction company crawling out. That means that the play field is more levered. You won't have the great biddings that we had in the past. For the privatization assets, because we knew how that things work. They gave the bidding, and then you sorted out how to work around that. So since they are not around anymore, the assets are there, and the price is going to be much more fair or market price, which led me to a point. You have to find who is the right middle-sized partner in Brazil to operate that. Since the big guys are not anymore there, that's one. The opportunity is there, but also the challenge is there. You have to figure out who is the right partner to partner with, a middle-sized operating company. either in airports, in renewable, in energy, whatever. You have to find that guy. Second point, I mean, in our view, economy has just hit bottom. Give or take like 6 months. Now in 6 months, 3 months, but for a 10-year horizon, that's not the time is now. The third one, that's also important. We believe that for the first time in almost 20 years, I mean, not 20 years, since 1964, when Brazil was in the military dictatorship, and then you have the election in '89, we always had a left-leaning candidate with a strong chance of winning. They didn't win in '89, they didn't win in the two following elections, but they won in 2002. But they were there strongly competing. We believe that we won't have that in 2018. And I have to point out that left in Brazil is far more left than in Canada and in Europe. I mean, the left, I'm talking about the left in Brazil, that it's, in our view, some stages behind of accepting the market and the economic bigger picture. So I think that's a strong point. We don't believe in 2018 we're going to have a left-leaning candidate of that type with a real chance of winning the election. The fourth point is the concession privatization agenda right now is much less emotional and more rational than before. We had a chance to host the Brazilian government here in London in the middle of October in a couple of round tables that we did with 30 or more investors, and the language, the signals, I mean the dialogue, it's much more different than we had seen in the past in terms of understanding what the investor needs, what is important for them, and what should be the role of the government. So you see that there is a much more rational approach. I saw that on the round tables with the ministers. The fifth important thing is that we believe that the major reforms will be approved. The cap spending, which was approved yesterday in this first round in the Senate for a 61 votes against 14, it's a very big margin, and in 2 weeks going to be put for the second round, and it's a law. And we believe that the reforms in the pension fund, the pension scheme reform will be approved, and that will make the future GDP deficit to change course. The curves of the GDP deficit in Brazil for the next 20 years will dislocate themselves with those reforms, for sure. And that brings me to the last point. As a result of that, the interest rate will go down. Not in 6 months, not in 1 year, but the long term, the long 10 years perspective, that interest rate will go down. And that will affect the infrastructure asset price a lot. Of course, that they will increase. So, I mean, to summarize that, I think that it's fair to say that today Brazil, maybe the picture is not so good, but the moving forward, I mean, if you have a move with motion, it's pretty much looking good, especially for infrastructure, looking for the next 10 years. I mean, that's my rationale. Infrastructure is the place to be, and now, and the key is how to find the middle-size operator to partner with in Brazil, because I mean it's a completely different game right now without the big construction company for pricing, of course, the assets, but also you have to find the guy to operate for you. That's my 10-minute takes.
Thank you very much, Paulo. I just want to add to what Paulo said, like the opportunities in infrastructure are on greenfield, brownfield projects. We also see some of those companies, construction companies, that are involved in the Lava Jato corruption scandals, selling their assets. So Brookfield, for example, Brookfield bought those 2 assets that I said in my initial comments. The 2 assets that Brookfield bought was one from Petrobras and one from Odebrecht. So that itself represents a tremendous opportunity for M&A in Brazil, an opportunity for investors to enter the market. On the finding the new partner, those companies that are involved in the Lava Jato, Andrade Gutierrez, for example, one of the Brazilian's largest and best construction companies, they already made an unions agreement with the government, so they will be participating on concessions and bidding on those infrastructure. But now it's a totally different approach, as Paulo said. And Odebrecht, I heard that people are saying that Marcelo Odebrecht signed yesterday his agreement, so it will become public soon. They will also be playing again, but they will be playing in a different way, right? So that's the positive message for international investors. Thank you so much, Paulo. We'll open for questions after our speakers finish their presentation. So, Louis-Pierre,
thank you.
Over to you.
Okay, thank you.
I think we need to
Do I need the mic or?
The mic will take.
Oh, so I can just go ahead? All right, thank you. My name is Louis-Pierre. I'm the Consul and Senior Trade Commissioner for Canada and Brazil. Very glad to be back in Canada for a few days and to take part in the event, thanks to the BCCC and all the partners and other parties involved in the organization of the event. Very happy to be here. I'll be relatively brief because I'm also very conscious that the next presentation will be made at 12 by my boss, the ambassador, so I wouldn't want to take time away from him. But I'll highlight some key messages that we've noticed on the ground in Brazil and key messages that we've heard from our Canadian clients and companies that I think are quite important to underline. Well, first of all, I arrived in Brazil about 2 years ago, just after the World Cup in 2014. And I have 2 more years to go, so I'll have been there from 2014 to 2018, which, well, hopefully it wasn't my fault, but it'll end up having been probably the toughest 4 years in Brazil politics and in the economy over the last few years for sure. Hopefully it wasn't my fault, I hope not, but it was an interesting period, as we all know. We've had various presenters today mention some of the politics behind what happened and some of the reforms that are now being discussed or taking place. And the interesting part from our perspective as the Trade Commissioner Service is that throughout this period we've continued to see large numbers of Canadian companies and clients be interested in Brazil. No matter they were there at the high times, but they continued to have interest throughout this period. And that's quite important. We've seen the type of interest change over the years. From what was probably more a pure trade promotion or exports of Canadian products towards Brazil just a few years back. Now we've seen a bit of a switch towards more interest in M&A, foreign direct investment, of course from Brazil to Canada, from Canada to Brazil, and science, technology, and innovation. I think we've seen a lot more interest in maybe smaller companies, medium-sized companies in high-tech areas, look at potential for co-developing technologies or products or services, either in Canada or in Brazil, and to share in the development of these projects. This is quite interesting, and it's a new, I guess, door that we've opened recently, and that we're happy to see that it's moving ahead. I'll mention some of the key sectors where we have seen successes, but where we expect in 2017 growth, hopefully, and interest from both sides. But before I get started, I'll just mention very quickly that, as most of you must know, the Trade Commissioner Service's objective and mandate is to help Canadian clients to mostly export to Brazil, attract foreign direct investment towards Canada, and help in finding science, technology, and innovation projects that can be developed jointly by both countries. We have an important program in Brazil. It remains an important program. We have 6 offices covering the entire geography of Brazil, and over 30 to 35 staff. So I invite all Canadian clients with interest in Brazil to contact me or our team, and we'll be very happy to assist. What we've seen over the last few years, our priorities have always been the aerospace sector. Over the last couple of years in particular, the education sector has grown tremendously. We've seen a lot of successes, and of course, bringing Brazilian students to Canada, which is great. We like to see that, of course, but we like to work with the Brazilian students when they come back to Brazil after their stay in Canada, because obviously they become what we like to call little ambassadors for Canada, and they end up working with Brazilian firms and often have this interest in building a relationship with a Canadian company, or continue that link that they have with Canada. So we're very proud to have seen these successes, and we hope that we know that we'll continue to see that level of interest from Brazilian students to come and study here. We find that in ICT, high-tech areas, we've continued to see a positive movement. FinTech is an area where we've seen tangible successes. We've had various missions of companies go from Brazil to Canada, others from Canada to Brazil, so quite positive discussions in these areas. Sustainable technology, of course, Brazil continues to need improvements to a lot of its infrastructure in these areas, and of course this is a sector or subsector where Canada is quite strong and well known worldwide for the engineering services that they can provide. So we're looking forward in 2017 to see a lot more Canadian companies inquire about the projects that hopefully the local governments, municipal governments, state governments will be able to launch as the economy stabilizes. In terms of infrastructure, which of course includes sustainable technology, but more generally speaking, infrastructure projects, airports, ports, roads, highways, this had been and has been a difficult market to enter for our Canadian companies. Of course, the big players had an important role in that sector. Now we all know what's happening with the big players. They're on the side for the time being, which creates a bit of a void. And of course, the incoming Tavares government has clearly indicated that they're hoping to see a larger presence of foreign investors and foreign companies able and willing to take part in some of these major projects. So we feel that there's a strong potential for our Canadian engineering firms that have at some point tried to look at Brazil in the past, maybe thought it was difficult to enter and challenging. We hope that they now see this opportunity, and in the next year and hopefully the next couple of years, try to find a partner locally, hopefully, which is always helpful in Brazil, and build a bit of a joint venture of some kind to take part in these projects. One way in particular that we think this will move forward is through the PPP model. Every group and institution that we've spoken with over the last months is always quite interested in finding out more about the PPP model, where of course the Canadian version of that model is quite well known and appreciated, and a lot of the state and municipal and federal governments want to learn more about the model, but also want to learn more about the Canadian companies and engineering firms that might take part in some of these projects. So we'll be working on that. We invite all Canadian companies in these areas to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to try to get them involved in that discussion. So just to maybe wrap up on some of these things, we all know that the last couple of years have been tough. It's certainly not here to say that things have been rosy, but things have continued to grow. Certainly, our Canadian exports to Brazil grew in 2015, which was surprising, but overall a good news. And we're here to look at the silver linings and the key areas where we think that in 2017, slowly but surely, growth will come back, and our Canadian companies will be there to take part in this growth. So maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you,
Some
Louis-Pierre.
time for other panelists.
Thank you very much. That's a fantastic summary about the industries, the key industries for Brazil and Brazilian and Canadian companies to explore. And if you are considering to enter the Brazilian market, I do recommend you to talk with the Trade Commissioner Service in São Paulo, in Rio. They do a fantastic job in assisting Canadian companies taking advantage and understanding a little bit more about Brazil and the opportunities that Brazil presents. Daniella, can you hear us? I see that you are connected there.
Yes, hello, how are you?
Good, and you? So,
Good.
over to you then.
Okay, so thanks BCCC, Baker McKenzie and Frederico, and I'm sorry I was not there. I was on my way to the airport, but I had a problem with a client and I had to stay here. But I'll try to do on the best way as possible. I think I'll try to take the infrastructure a little bit aside because a lot of people already talk about that. And I think it's really a trend and a good opportunity. We have the PPI law, which we will see how it's going to go, I think, on the next year. But it's a good law if you take it out of the paper and put it in practice. So, and as Paulo mentioned, I think infrastructure was, it will be for the next 10 years the place to invest in Brazil, especially now that the big companies are kind of out of the market. And I agree with Frederico that they are trying to clean up what they did in the past, and a certain way they will be back. Not only Andrade, but also Odebrecht. They are actually on the scenario because they're selling assets, right? And they are good assets. We advise some of them, and I would say that despite of course, the corruption part of that, they have good assets. They have airports, they have concessions, they have roads, they have a lot of good assets that investors are taking that as an opportunity because we are on a good scenario to look into the future to invest in Brazil. So this year, on the beginning of the year, we talked with some investors, and it was a very bad scenario because we didn't have yet the political outcome from the impeachment. But now that Dilma is out, Temer is on the government, and he's really trying to do his work. We have the PPI, as Paulo also mentioned, we have the PEC on the public budget for the government to be approved. We have the Social Security plan approved, and we also think it will be approved. So now that we have an uncertainty, kind of uncertainty in the market, I think that even though the future it's bright, we don't have this black hole anymore that we are not going to go. We don't know where Brazil will go. At least now there is a brighter scenario where we will be in the next years. So talking a little bit on the M&A side, we had a consolidation on certain markets, such as education, health, technology. I think it's a market that is having a lot of consolidation and acquisitions and stuff. I think another market it's going to be very big next year is the security market. We are very close to some important decisions from the government on foreign investments on the security market. So I think it will be a market that it's going to be open for foreigners finally. And I think talking on a broader way about doing business in Brazil, Frederico mentioned a very important point, that when you come to Brazil, Brazil is a very good place to be, and I think that we have like strong institutions and a good scenario despite of the crisis and stuff for investments. But I think it's a stranger animal. We have a very difficult tax structure for foreigners to understand. We have labor laws that are kind of still very protective to employees and very, very expensive. So one thing that is very interesting, that for investors, when they come in partnerships with local companies, I think it's easier for them to digest all this strange scenario. And we feel that a lot when foreign investors come to Brazil and start a due diligence. It's almost a deal breaker all the time that they face the tax contingencies, the labor contingencies, employees that are not registered, tax issues that are greater than they can imagine. So I think when you have a local company to partner with, those issues that seems to be crazy and enormous gets on their right side. I think that for the future, regarding the concessions that the government are issuing, again, I think which is very important is not only to do with the new concessions, but also what and how the government will deal with the actual concessions, the ones that are on those big construction companies, and how they're going to get rid of them. I think this is going to be a good signalization to new investors coming to those new bids to understand and to have the certainty that they need to really invest. I was talking with Frederico the other day that one of the trends for the next years in Brazil will probably be also the gambling, because as you know, nowadays it's prohibited in Brazil, but the government is studying a new regulatory system and how to get this privatized. So probably this will be a big market for investments, especially from countries that are already legalized the gambling. Because it's not only the physical, but also the internet, the media, and everything. So it's a huge market that probably in the next year will be, I wouldn't say next year because the bidding process just got issued by the BNDES, but probably 2018 will be a huge market in Brazil. And I think that mostly to add what everybody already said, to conclude, Brazil, despite of the crisis, are issuing new laws and are looking for investment and are working for working to have a certainty and strong institutions to bring up investments to the country. So I think this is a good sign for investors to come here.
Thank you very much, Daniella. I think like there's also a couple of other sectors that Canadians can take advantage of the opportunities that Brazil. Daniella mentioned gambling. That will be huge in Brazil when it's finally. Can you hear now?
Yeah,
No?
it's like over there.
Yeah. Gambling will be a huge step, and Brazil and Canada can add so much value on that front. We also have the technology, and Louis-Pierre, he mentioned the technology sector, but I just want to emphasize, because we are seeing a lot of Brazilian companies coming to Canada. And why? Because they can access U.S. market from here. And they're also producing, developing products and softwares in Brazil cheaper than their competitors in the North American market. So we're seeing a trend on that way. But like we also see Canadian companies and major, small, medium size, also taking advantage of the devaluation of the Brazilian currency and current political situation and lack of difficulty to access capital in Brazil, to also do acquisitions on the technology industry in Brazil. Those are strategic acquisitions that will be complementary to their activities in North America. Another sector that will ramp up the next couple of years will be agriculture, where Canada has also a tremendous value to add to Brazil. And Brazilian companies, you see the ethanol in Brazil, like it's developed as better than in any other country in the world. So we can also add value. So there's a lot of complementary between Brazil and Canada and in those sectors as well. And we will see more companies doing business in those areas and investing and doing deals between Brazil and Canada. Also, consumer goods. Come on, Brazil is a market with 200 million people. If a Canadian saturated market, a Canadian company on a saturated market want to expand, Latin America is an easy place to expand their activity, and can take advantage of a good valuation of those companies from a buyer's perspective. It will be also very interesting. So now I'd like to open for questions from the audience for our panelists. Any questions? No questions. That's a positive sign of a great presentation. Thank you, our panelists, for your time and your effort to be here with us today, and Daniella and Paulo for kindly agree to do by video conference. Thank you so much, and thank all of you for paying attention and staying here with us. And now we're going to start our lunch. So thank you very much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Actually, Ambassador Savon will be speaking via video conference.
Oh, excellent.
Is it through here, Carolina?
Do we have Ambassador
Yeah.
Savon?
Okay.
Yeah.